Hey guys, so I am technically working the example problem from my math lab for problem 841, the one on surface area and volume of a cone. But this video is really going to be more about how to use my favorite calculator in the whole wide world. This one that is right here highlighted in the yellow and green. And it's a free online calculator. You will see in a second, I think you'll agree with me why it's so great. Even though I know it's not the same one that's in my math lab, this is the one that I use for everything. So let me walk you through the steps really quickly about how to use it. So I'm going to start with the volume formula. And we need to find the volume of this cone. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what represents what. So the formula for volume is the fraction 1/3. I'm just going to kind of rewrite that here. So 1/3. Now because the 1/3 is just sitting next to that pi button, that implies multiplication whenever you've got stuff sitting next to each other. So it's 1/3 times pi. The directions tell you to use the pi key on your calculator. So I'm not going to substitute that estimate of 3.14. I'm simply just going to replace it with the pi. The radius is given to us in the problem. The radius is that 16 centimeters. So it's going to be 16 centimeters. And we've got that little exponent right there, which implies that we're going to do 16 squared times h. And the height is given to us in the problem as well. So I'm going to need to type into this online calculator 1/3 times pi times 16 squared times 9. So let me show you how to do that. So over here to the online calculator, where you can see the blinking cursor that I have, that is where you're going to type in the information. Okay, so the blinking cursor is where you're going to type in the information. There are a few different sections of this graphing calculator, which I'll talk to you about, or not graphing calculator, sorry, scientific calculator, which I will show you how to use. So right now you can see that we are on, because it's highlighted, we're on the main section of the calculator. It's kind of what you think of as far as just like the normal everyday calculator kind of stuff. So in order to type in that fraction of 1/3, I am simply going to hit the button that looks like a fraction right there, the A over B. So I'm going to type the fraction button. And you'll notice I get a little fraction that is blinking in the entry box. The cursor is in the top, so I'm going to click 1. And then I'm going to hit the down button on my computer to get to the bottom of the fraction. So now I've got 1/3. Now you're going to notice what's happening out here to the side. This is my favorite part of the calculator. Everything that you type into this formula box, it gives you the value over here to the side. So because I did 1/3, if I converted 1/3 into a decimal, 1 divided by 3 is 0.33333, repeating. So this little part of the window is constantly updating, giving me the value of everything that I type in over here. And when we work this big long problem, especially the surface area one in a second, you're going to see why this is so amazing. So again, we indicated that we've got to do 1/3 times pi times r squared times h. So I'm going to type times. It told us to use pi on your calculator. So to get to the pi button, it's not here on the main screen. I'm going to have to go here to the function menu. So I'm going to type function, and then there's my pi button that I need right there next to the E down there on the bottom. So pi. To get back to the multiplication, I'm going to have to go back to the main menu again. So I know that's a little annoying going back and forth, but man, this still saves you a lot of work. Then I'm going to hit times. The radius we've already established is 16, so I'm going to type 16. And to get that 16 to be squared, I'm going to hit the little squared button that's right there. So I'm going to type squared. And then I still need to multiply it by the height, so I'm going to hit times 9. So the first step is always to the last step is to always double check and make sure that what you typed into the graphing calculator matches the formula. Okay, so I've got 1/3, 1/3. I've got my pi, there's my pi. I've got my 16 squared, or r squared, 16 squared, and finally the height times 9. I also made sure that I put little multiplication dots in between each of those. So I did. So it looks like I entered everything into the calculator correctly. And then, of course, the coolest part, the answer is already provided for me over here to the right-hand side. So here's where I need to look at the directions. The directions told me to round to the nearest hundredth as needed. So now I need to look at the second decimal number, because that is the hundredths place. So that 4. Remember to decide how to round. You look at the number next to it. The number next to it is a 3. So because that 3 is smaller than 5, when we round our final answer, it's going to be the 2,412.74. We're not going to round that 4 up because, again, the number next to it was smaller than 5. So our final volume is 2,412.74 centimeters cubed, because when we're doing volume, we do it to the third power. And if you look at the example problem, you will see that that is indeed the correct answer. So hopefully you're starting to see why this calculator is pretty great, because it really does most of the hard work for you. Okay, now we're going to attack that really fun problem, the surface area. So I need to hit the clear button on my calculator to make room for all this fun stuff we've got here in the formula. So let me just zoom in and highlight the surface area problem to make sure that we all know what is happening with this surface area problem. So again, I've got pi times r squared, kind of like I did up here, right? So there's really nothing different there. I'm going to use my pi button, and then I'm going to multiply it by the radius squared. Again, the radius is that 16. And then we've got our plus sign, and then pi times r. Again, since the pi and the r are sitting next to each other, that means we're going to multiply them in a second. Notice that here you had an r squared, here you have just a plain old r. So notice the difference there. We're not going to do an exponent for that one. And then the part that I have a tendency to think that a lot of people make a mistake is right here. You're going to notice that r squared plus h squared is all underneath this square root symbol over the top of them. Okay, so I'm going to show you, you've got to make sure that that r squared and that h squared is underneath the square root symbol when you're typing it into the calculator. Okay, so let's start with this fun one. Okay, so again, blinking cursor is here in the little entry box. I'm going to start off by doing pi times r squared. Remember, the pi button is here on the function screen. I'm going to click in pi. And as you can see, it gives me that 3.14159, that little estimate for pi already in my answer window. To get back to the multiplication, I'm going to go back to main, and I'm going to hit times. We've already established that the radius is 16, so I'm going to type 16. And in the first set, the radius is squared. So remember, in order to get that radius squared, I'm going to click that a squared button. Now the next part of my formula is that addition symbol. So I'm going to type plus. Once again, I've got to do pi times r. So I need to go back to the function area of the calculator, hit pi. I'm going to go back to the main, hit times 16 because my radius is 16. No squared this time though because it's not included. It doesn't have an exponent of 2 this time. Now this is where a lot of people start to make a mistake. So as you'll recall, we just discussed that because the pi r, all of that is sitting next to the square root. Remember, the square root is this little thing right there. Because they're sitting next to each other, that implies that you're going to be doing multiplication. So I'm going to go ahead and click this multiplication symbol. And then I'm going to hit, in order to get that square root to pop up, I need to hit the square root button that is right here on the calculator. Okay, now I'm going to warn you that I'm getting ready to make a mistake. Okay, I'm getting ready to do something wrong. And actually somebody asked a question specifically about this mistake. I noticed they were making this mistake on the discussion board. So r squared is the first thing that needs to go underneath that square root. So we know that the radius is 16. So I'm going to type in 16. Now, first of all, notice the first thing I did wrong there. My 16 is not underneath my square root symbol. You're going to notice here in the window, and that happened because in my case, I'm like doing the little app where I can write on my screen at the same time. Because I didn't immediately hit square root and then type 16 after it, the 16 should be right there in that little box, but I did not get that 16 under there correctly. So I'm not going to get the right answer because right now the 16, the radius that I need underneath the square root is not there underneath the square root. So anytime you make a mistake on this calculator, what you do is there's a little backspace button that is right there. Oh, oops, it would help if you could see it. So that button right there is how you fix your goofs. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to hit that button. I'm going to hit backspace, backspace, backspace again. Okay, so now I'm going to hit square root. And now the blinking cursor is actually underneath the square root symbol. So I'm going to hit 16. Now, I am going to make another common mistake. As long as you do the steps correctly, it's okay. But let's say I don't do it right. I like click my blinker. See right now my cursor, I kind of like tapped outside. So now I'm going to hit the squared button and see now what just happened, that my exponent is outside of the square root. So that is going to mess me up again. So I got to make sure that I'm careful. Again, I'm going to hit the backspace. I'm going to start over again. On this calculator, make sure that the cursor is underneath the square root. So 16. And then I'm going to click the a squared. Now notice the squared is underneath the square root symbol. Now what I've noticed a lot of people doing wrong is that when they put this into their calculator, then they somehow get out from underneath the square root and they hit plus, and then the height squared is of course 9 squared. Now notice that this does not look like my formula because the 9 squared is not underneath the square root symbol like it should be in my formula. So if your problem looks like this in your calculator, you are not going to end up with the right answer because the 16 squared and the 9 squared both need to be underneath the square root. So I'm going to hit backspace, backspace, keep hitting backspace again. And now I'm going to stay underneath the square root. So now I'm going to hit plus 9 and then the squared button. So notice the difference between what I did the first time and what I've done this time. Now the 16 squared and the 9 squared are both underneath the square root symbol. I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to double check and make sure that the formula matches what I typed into my calculator. So I've got pi times r squared. Here I've got pi times 16 squared, so I got that part right, plus pi times r, plus pi times 16, and then underneath the square root is r squared plus h squared, and underneath the square root I do have 16 squared plus 9 squared. And of course that multiplication is there in between to represent the fact that I am multiplying. So I've typed it all in correctly. So now I've got a pretty good idea that I can trust this little answer that has popped up for me here in the answer window. And again, I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth. The hundredths place is the second decimal point. So that is going to be the second 9. So then I look to the number to the right to see whether I round it up or down. So notice the number to the right is also a 9, which is 5 or bigger. So that means that this is going to be rounded up, and because it just happens to be 99, that means that if I round up this 0.99, it's actually going to round the whole number up as well. So instead of 1,726, now it's going to be 1,727. And because we are talking about surface area, It is centimeters squared. So my final surface area is 1,727 centimeters squared.